The snow had already covered her ankles by the time she stopped walking. Clara did not fall. She did not cry. She simply reached a point where her legs refused to carry her any further, and she stood still, looking out at the wall of pine trees ahead of her, their dark shapes blurring in the wind-driven dark. The temperature had dropped past the point where cold felt like cold. It felt like nothing now, pressure without sensation. Her fingers, which she had stopped being able to feel 20 minutes ago, hung at her sides. Her coat, thin, wrong for this, chosen by someone else, snapped against her ribs in the wind. She had been walking for 4 hours. She knew this because she had counted her steps at the beginning, until the counting stopped making sense, and then she had watched the sky, until the sky disappeared behind cloud, and then she had simply walked, because stopping felt worse than moving, even when moving accomplished nothing. The forest ahead of her belonged to someone. She knew that too. Everyone in the valley knew that the pine ridge to the north was not for ordinary people. The signs posted at its edges were not the kind with warnings about trespassing fines. They were the kind that said nothing at all, which was somehow worse. Blank white squares on metal posts, evenly spaced, going in both directions until they disappeared into the dark. No words, just the implication that words were unnecessary. She walked past one of them without stopping. She had nothing to lose that had not already been taken. The tree line swallowed her. The wind dropped by half inside the pines, but the temperature did not, and she moved between the trunks, like something that had already decided to be still and simply had not caught up to itself yet. Her breath came in thin, even clouds. One foot, then the other. The snow here was deeper, untouched, mid-calf, and every step required a small, exhausting negotiation with gravity. She made it another 100 yards before her knees stopped cooperating. She went down slowly. That was the part she would not remember later, how slow and deliberate it was, how she arranged herself before she landed, turned partially so that her cheek met the snow instead of the bridge of her nose, tucked her arms in close to her sides the way she had learned to do in cold rooms when there were no blankets. The body remembers its survival habits even when the mind has given up making plans. The snow was very quiet. She was looking at the underside of a pine branch, the needles dark and close above her face. A perfect small ceiling, and she thought that it was not a terrible last thing to look at. Her right ear was already numb against the snow. The earring in her left ear, silver, small, a circle, caught the faint ambient light from somewhere above the cloud cover, and that tiny gleam was the last deliberate thing she focused on before her eyes stopped staying open. She did not hear them coming. The first wolf stopped 10 feet away from her and did not move. He was not the largest of the group, and he was not the youngest, and in the hierarchy of the pack he occupied a position that had more to do with age than rank, with the kind of quiet authority that requires nothing to enforce itself. His name, in the language of the pack, was something that did not translate into human sound, but the humans in the valley, the few who had ever seen him at a distance, called him nothing, because they did not stay long enough to need a name for him. He stood in the snow and looked at the woman and did not move. The others fanned out slowly behind him. 7 of them on this run, a routine sweep of the northern perimeter, nothing expected. The storm had pushed unusual things toward the ridge before. Deer confused by the wind, once a bear moving too early in the season, but nothing like this. The scent of her had reached them before the visual, carried on the shifting air inside the trees, and it was the scent that had changed the pace of the run from patrol to something more deliberate. She did not smell like a threat. She smelled like cold and exhaustion and something underneath those things, something older, the way old wood smells when you split it, the deep interior of something that has been standing a long time. The wolves had no framework for what they were sensing. They simply responded to it. The old wolf took 2 steps forward and lowered his nose to the snow beside her face. She was breathing, barely. The exhalations came out at long, irregular intervals, and each one was smaller than the last, and the old wolf sat down beside her in the snow with the unhurried certainty of something that had made a decision and was not interested in discussing it. The others waited. One of the younger wolves at the back of the group shifted his weight. A low sound from the old one stopped him. 3 minutes passed, or 10, the storm moving overhead and the pines creaking in the upper branches the way they do when the wind is serious. And then the communication went out through the pack in the way pack communication works. Not sound, not quite. Something closer to the sudden shared knowledge that a room shifts to when someone important walks in. The Alpha King was called. He had been awake. He was usually awake at this hour, not from insomnia exactly, but from the particular restlessness of a man whose responsibilities do not observe the division between day and night. He was in the north tower of the main house when the awareness reached him, and he was outside and moving within 30 seconds, his coat half-buttoned, boots unlaced, which was unusual for a man who was rarely anything less than completely prepared. He ran the half-mile to the ridge in the kind of focused silence that meant he was already cataloging possibilities. A human in pack territory at night in a storm. The options were lost, injured, deliberate trespass, or something else. He ranked them by probability as he moved. By the time he reached the tree line, he had quietly eliminated 3 of the 4. The wolves parted for him. He saw the old one first, sitting. Then he saw what the old one was sitting beside, and he stopped. She was face down in the snow, her dark hair spread against the white, one arm tucked under her body and the other stretched slightly out, fingers open. The coat she wore was a dark green, and it was not a winter coat. He could tell that from 10 feet away. He could also tell, from the same distance, that she had not been running, had not fallen in any kind of panic. The impression in the snow told a different story. She had gone down on purpose, or as close to purpose as a body can manage, when the person inside it has stopped objecting to what happens next. He closed the distance and crouched beside her. He put 2 fingers to the side of her neck without hesitation. The pulse was there, thin and uneven, but there. Her skin under his fingers was the temperature of the snow she was lying in, and he moved fast after that, getting his arms under her, lifting her with the efficiency of someone who had carried injured people before and was not gentle the way people are gentle with fragile things, but careful the way people are careful with important ones. She moved, not waking, not conscious, but her body, responding to the warmth of contact after so long without it, shifted away from him. A small automatic flinch, shoulders drawing in, head turning, the reflexive withdrawal of someone who had learned that being touched was more likely to mean harm than help. He held her steady and did not let her turn away from the warmth. He stood there in the snow for 1 moment, holding her, the wolves around him and the storm above, and the forest perfectly still in the way that felt less like quiet and less like waiting, and he looked down at her face, which he could only half see, one cheek pale, lips slightly parted, lashes dark against the white skin under her eye. She wore 1 earring. He noticed it the way you notice things that arrive with their own emphasis. A small silver circle in her left ear, catching what little light existed. Just the one, the right ear bare. The absence of the other one was not a small thing, and he did not know why he was certain of that, but he was. He carried her out of the trees. The old wolf walked beside him the entire way back, not behind him, beside him, and the Alpha King, a man who had ruled this territory for 11 years, who had made decisions that altered the shape of lives and never once second-guessed himself after the fact, felt the wolf's presence at his left side and found that he was glad for it in a way he did not examine. The healer was already awake when he arrived. Of course she was. Her name was Dora, and she was 71 years old, and she had the specific energy of a woman who had been preparing for whatever walked through her door since before she knew what it would be. She took 1 look at the woman in his arms and pointed at the table. "Set her down, gently, and then step back and let me work." He set her down gently. He stepped back. He did not technically let Dora work without interference. He stayed in the room, which was as much stepping back as he was capable of at that particular moment, and he stood with his arms crossed at the edge of the lamplight and watched Dora move with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been putting people back together for 5 decades. The woman on the table did not wake, but somewhere around the third minute, when Dora had gotten the wet coat off her and wrapped her in the heavy blankets from the cedar chest in the corner and was checking the temperature of her hands and feet, the woman's lips moved. One word. Dora looked up at him. Did you catch that? He had. He had been watching her face with the kind of attention he usually reserved for situations that required it. He did not repeat the word out loud. It was a name, a woman's name, said not with fear or with affection, but with a flatness that was worse than either, the way you might say the name of a fact you have had a long time and still do not understand. He uncrossed his arms. He crossed them again. Keep her warm, he said, which was unnecessary because Dora was already doing that, but saying something useful felt better than standing silently in the room with the weight of the thing he was not saying. He left. He stood outside the door in the narrow hallway and looked at the dark window at the end of it, the snow blowing sideways past the glass, and he thought about a coat too thin for a blizzard, and a deliberate descent into the snow, and one earring, and a name said in a voice that had already made peace with everything. He thought about the old wolf sitting down, not howling for the pack, not circling for a threat assessment, sitting, as if he had arrived at a conclusion before anyone asked him a question. The Alpha King was a man who made decisions based on information, on evidence, on the logical weight of what he knew and what he could reasonably project. He was not a man who made decisions based on the behavior of an old wolf in a snowstorm. He went back to his office and stood at the window for a very long time. Below in the courtyard, the old wolf had returned. He sat in the snow outside the healer's window, upright, unhurried, in the particular posture of something keeping a promise. The woman they had pulled from the snow did not have a name yet, not one they knew, but the pack had already given her something harder to earn and easier to lose. They had given her their attention, and in this territory, among these people, that was not a small beginning. Inside the healer's room, her pulse steadied through the early hours of the morning. Slowly, with effort, like something climbing a hill it was not sure it had the energy to reach the top of, but climbing anyway, because the alternative was giving the hill what it wanted. The silver earring in her left ear caught the lamplight. The right ear stayed bare. Outside, the snow kept falling on the space in the forest where she had lain down, filling in the impression of her body until there was nothing left to see, smoothing everything back to white. Whatever she had been before she walked into those trees, she would not be that when she came back out. She just did not know that yet. She opened her eyes on the third morning. The ceiling above her was stone, old stone, pale gray, with the faint texture of something built by hand a long time ago. She studied it for a while before she let her gaze move to the rest of the room. The lamp, the cedar chest, the heavy wooden door, the narrow window with gray light coming through it. Snow outside, still snowing or snowing again. She turned her head slowly and found she was not alone. Sitting in the chair beside the table she was lying on was a woman with white hair pulled back tightly, reading a book the size of a brick, who looked up over her reading glasses with the particular calm of someone who had been waiting without impatience for a specific length of time. "Good," the woman said, and turned a page. That was all. Clara lay still and listened to the sound of the page turning, and the snow at the window, and somewhere further away, outside, something she could not quite identify, a low sound, steady, the exact frequency of something keeping watch. She did not ask where she was. She already understood that wherever she was, she had not been brought here to be hurt. The understanding sat in her chest alongside everything else she was carrying, and she let it. She did not reach for it or push it away. She simply noted it, the way you note the temperature of a room when you first walk in, information that is useful without requiring a response. On the floor beside her chair, folded with military precision, was a blanket that had not been there when she first noticed the room. She did not know who had brought it, or when, or why they had folded it that way. She pulled it over herself without comment and went back to watching the ceiling. Dora turned another page. Outside, the old wolf sat in the snow and did not move. And somewhere in the north tower of the main house, a man stood at a window with his arms crossed, looking at the gray sky, thinking about things that had no clean category in any system he had built his life around. The name she had whispered in the dark was not one he recognized. He would know it by end of day. He was very thorough that way. When the man named Owen Hale heard that name, he set down his coffee and did not pick it up again for the rest of the morning. He was the Alpha King's second, and he had heard many things in that role that required him to set things down. But the name Clara Vane, combined with the information that a woman matching the description had been found face down in the northern snow in a coat designed for autumn, wearing one earring, with old injuries layered under new cold, produced a specific feeling in him that he associated with problems that did not resolve cleanly. He pulled every file that carried that name before noon. He did not like what he found. He brought it to the Alpha King without editorializing. That was his job, to bring the information and leave the conclusions to the man who had to live with them. The Alpha King read the file twice. He closed it. He looked out the window. "She's awake," Owen said. "Dora sent word an hour ago. She's not speaking, but she's responsive." The Alpha King nodded once. "She's not leaving," he said. It was not a question. It was not quite an order yet either. It sat in the space between those two things, which was where he spent a significant amount of his time. Owen said nothing, which was its own kind of agreement. "Post someone near the healer's wing," the Alpha King said. "Someone quiet, not a guard, someone who can be there without being obviously there. Any other instructions?" A pause. The window. The snow. "Make sure she has enough blankets," he said, and went back to reading. Owen left without smiling, because he was professional, and waited until he was in the hallway to let the corner of his mouth do what it wanted to do. He had worked for this man for 9 years. He had never once heard him ask about blankets. What Clara Vane felt when she finally looked directly at the fire in the small hearth across the room, 3 hours after waking, was not gratitude. Gratitude requires a particular kind of safety that she had not yet established. What she felt was something more provisional. Curiosity, maybe. A willingness to observe before deciding. She had not expected to be anywhere. That was the honest version of it. She observed the room, and the room was warm, and the old woman with the white hair refilled her water without being asked, and did not ask her any questions, which was the kindest thing anyone had done for Clara Vane in longer than she wanted to count. She filed that information carefully. She had learned, a long time ago, to be very precise about what things meant, so she was not surprised by them later. She looked at the empty right side of her ear in the small mirror propped on the windowsill. She had been wearing that earring the last time she saw her sister. The mirror got nothing from her face, not then. She set it down gently and asked Dora, in a voice that came out rougher than she intended, if she could have something to eat. Dora said yes without looking up from her book. Outside, the snow finally stopped. The sky above the pine ridge broke open in a single, clear line of pale light along the horizon, the first real light in days, and it lit the tops of the trees like something being introduced for the first time. Clara Vane pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window and looked at it for a long moment. She did not know yet what she was at the beginning of. She only knew she was beginning it, which was more than she had expected to be doing. The Alpha King came to her door on the third evening and did not knock. He stood in the hallway, which is a different thing, and he stood there long enough for Dora to look up from her book and look at the door and then look back at her book with the expression of a woman who has lived long enough to recognize a man who needs a moment. He knocked. Clara said nothing. He opened the door. She was sitting up, wrapped in the heavy blanket, looking at the window. She did not turn when he came in. She tracked him in the glass, the reflection giving her the shape of a tall man with dark hair and a coat that looked like it had been put on in a hurry and never fully corrected. He stopped at a reasonable distance. "How are you feeling?" he said. It was not delivered with the rising inflection of a question. It landed flat, direct, the statement of a man who was asking because he actually wanted to know, not because it was the thing people said. She turned then, looked at him directly. He looked back. Neither of them filled the silence immediately, and the silence did not feel like discomfort. It felt like two people taking an honest measurement of each other without pretending otherwise. "I'm alive," she said. That was not the plan. He absorbed this without reacting to it. "I know," he said. She looked at him for another long moment. "You read something about me." "Yes. And you still let me stay." He said nothing to that, which was its own answer. She turned back to the window. The reflection of him stood in the glass, coat still imperfect, hands at his sides, and she watched that shape for a moment, the way you watch something you have not decided yet whether to trust. "I'm not a threat to your territory," she said. "I know that too." A pause. "My name is Clara," she said. "I know," he said. Then, after a moment, "I'm Calder." She did not respond immediately. Then, so quietly it barely carried, "That's a serious name. I'm told I'm a serious person." She almost did something with her face. Not quite a smile, something adjacent. He left shortly after. He did not make promises or offer explanations or tell her what came next. He simply said good night in the voice of someone who meant it and closed the door behind him and walked back down the hallway without looking back. Dora waited a full 30 seconds. "Calder," she said to no one in particular, with the tone of someone annotating a document for posterity. Clara pulled the blanket tighter and said nothing, but she had stopped looking at the door behind him. That, for Clara Vane, was the equivalent of something enormous. He was in his office when the first report landed on his desk, one of his contacts in the valley. Short, factual. A woman named Eleanor Vane had filed a missing persons report with the town office 3 days prior. The report described her daughter Clara as emotionally unstable, prone to wandering, a danger to herself, in need of immediate return to family care. It was a very clean report. Calder read it 3 times. The word choice was deliberate. Emotionally unstable was doing work that facts could not do. It was preemptive. It was the kind of language you put in a document when you want whoever reads it later to already have an opinion before they meet the person. He set the report down and picked up the thin file beside it, the one Owen had assembled. Photographs mostly. Documents. A pattern that emerged only when the individual pieces were laid side by side. The kind of pattern that no single piece would confirm on its own, but that became undeniable the moment you saw the whole shape of it. Clara Vane was 28 years old. She had been, by all visible accounts, a careful, quiet, capable woman who managed her life in the particular way of people who have had to manage too much on their own from too young an age. There were no dramatic records, no incidents, nothing that would give a stranger an obvious foothold for the story her mother was telling, which was exactly how those stories worked. He knew how those stories worked. He stood at the window for a long time after that, not moving, the report from Eleanor Vane face down on the desk behind him, and he thought about a coat too light for a blizzard and a word whispered in the dark with all the emotion wrung out of it. He thought about what it takes to lie down in the snow on purpose. He thought about what it takes to get up from it. He pulled out a blank sheet of paper, which was unusual for a man who handled most things digitally, and he wrote 3 lines by hand and folded it and gave it to Owen without explanation. Owen read it, looked at him, did not ask. "Delivered by end of tomorrow?" Owen asked. "Tonight," Calder said. Owen went. Calder put the Eleanor Vane report in the bottom drawer of his desk and turned the key in the lock. He did not throw it away, because he was thorough, and thorough people kept records. But he turned the key. Clara ate a full meal that night for the first time. Dora set it in front of her without ceremony, soup and bread and something warm in a cup that smelled like ginger, and Clara worked through it steadily without speaking, and Dora read her book, and the fire in the small hearth made its small sounds, and outside the window, The cleared sky showed the kind of stars that are only visible when the air is very cold and very clean. Clara looked at them for a moment between spoonfuls. She had not expected there to be stars. She filed that too. Not as hope, exactly. She was too careful for that word yet. But as data, as something real that she had observed and could hold on to. She finished the soup. She folded the cloth napkin on the table with careful, even folds, corners aligned. 4 times. Set it down. She looked at her own hands. They were steady. She had not expected that either. The old wolf was back outside her window when she checked before sleeping, sitting in the cleared snow, upright, ears forward. She did not know his name. She did not know why he was there. She did not know what any of this was. This place, this man with the serious name and the unlaced boot, this healer who asked no questions, this territory with its blank white signs that said nothing and meant something. She only knew that she had lain down in the snow with no expectations of morning. And morning had come anyway. 3 mornings, in fact. She pressed her palm to the cold glass, the same way she had that afternoon. The wolf looked up at her. She looked back. Neither of them moved for a long moment, and then Clara Vane let out a breath that had been inside her chest for longer than one night, longer than one forest, longer than she could calculate cleanly, and she watched the small cloud of it fog the glass and fade. She went to sleep. For the first time in a long time, she did not sleep with one ear listening for a door. The next morning, Calder came back. He did not announce this. He simply appeared in the doorway at a reasonable hour with 2 cups of something hot and the expression of a man who had decided something in the night and was not going to be dramatic about it. He held 1 cup out toward her. She looked at it, looked at him. "I don't know what that is," she said. "Neither do I," he said. "Dora made it." Clara considered this, which was apparently recommendation enough, and took the cup. He sat in the chair that Dora usually occupied, and Dora was conspicuously absent, and Clara suspected that this absence had been arranged by someone, though she was not sure which of them had done the arranging. They sat with the fire and the 2 cups of whatever Dora had made, and outside the snow had started again, light this time, the easy kind, and the light through the window was the pale, flat light of a sky that had no agenda. "You found out about her," Clara said. "Not asking." "Yes," Calder said. "And you're going to tell me what you're going to do about it." He looked at her directly. "I'm going to ask you what you want." Clara stopped. She set the cup down very carefully on the arm of her chair. "Nobody asks me that," she said. Her voice was even. "Just information." "I know," he said. "That's why I'm asking." The fire made its sounds. Clara Vane picked up the cup again and looked at the window, where the snow fell easy and light against the gray, and she was quiet for a full minute. Not the silence of someone who had nothing to say, but the silence of someone who was deciding something that deserved to be decided carefully. "I want to stay," she said. It cost her something, saying it. He could see that. He did not comment on it. "Then you stay," he said, like it was simple. It was not simple. They both knew it was not simple. There was a woman in a valley with a story already written and connections that gave that story weight, and there were systems and structures and complications that would need to be navigated with precision and patience and a certain amount of force. None of that was simple, but the staying itself was. He looked at the snow outside the window. She looked at it too. Neither of them spoke for a while, and the silence had the quality of something that was not empty, but had simply run out of needing to be filled. Outside, somewhere below the window, the old wolf sat in his usual place, keeping watch, the way he had from the beginning, in a town 9 miles south of the Pine Ridge, in a house that looked from the outside like the home of a respectable and well-organized woman. Eleanor Vane received a letter that evening. It had no return address. It was 3 lines long. She read it twice. Her face did not change. She set it on the table. She put her hands flat on the wood surface and looked at the wall for a moment, and then she picked up the letter and read it a 3rd time, as if the words might rearrange themselves into something more agreeable. They did not. They said exactly what they said. Clara is alive. She is under our protection. She will not be returning. Do not file further reports, as any claims made to authorities will be answered with documentation that is considerably more thorough than yours. She set it down. She picked up her phone. She put it back down. She had spent a long time building something that depended on Clara being unable to say no. That depended on Clara having nowhere else to go. That depended, at its foundation, on Clara's world being small enough to contain. The letter changed the dimensions of the world. Eleanor Vane sat in her clean, organized kitchen and looked at the wall for a very long time. She was not finished. She was a woman who had never once been simply finished. But tonight, in this kitchen, with this letter on the table, she was something she had not been in a very long time. She was surprised. And 9 miles away, through the snow and the pine ridge and the blank white signs that said nothing and meant everything, Clara Vane was sleeping without one ear listening for a door, and the stars above the territory were the cold, clean kind that are only visible when the air is honest. The old wolf sat outside. He would be there when she woke up. He always was. 3 weeks passed before Clara left the healer's room under her own power. Not because she was too unwell to move, though the first week she had been, genuinely, not well, but because Dora had a specific theory about recovery that had nothing to do with medical benchmarks and everything to do with a woman's internal timing. And the theory was that a person healed when she was ready to, and not a day before, and pressure in either direction only made the timeline longer. So she let Clara stay. Clara, for her part, filled the time in ways that were quiet and deliberate. She read whatever was available in the room, 2 thick reference books, and a collection of plant illustrations Dora used for her work, and she looked out the window at considerable length, and she folded things. Blankets, cloths, the paper wrapping from the packages Dora received. She folded them with the focus of someone who needed her hands to have a clear purpose while her mind worked on something else. Dora watched all of this without comment. On day 12, Clara asked if she could help with something. Dora handed her a bowl and pointed at a jar of dried herbs and said to separate the stems from the leaves. Clara did this for 2 hours without speaking, focused, precise, the stems accumulating in one neat pile and the leaves in another. "You have good hands," Dora said, which from Dora was a significant statement. Clara looked at her hands. "I used to do this kind of thing. Before." She did not elaborate. Dora did not ask her to. That was the shape of it, those 3 weeks. Information arriving in small, careful units. Nothing pushed. Nothing extracted. The room had its rhythms. Dora's book, Clara's hands, the fire, the wolf outside the window, and gradually those rhythms became something that Clara's body relaxed into without her authorizing it. Calder came every evening. He never stayed long. He brought the cups of whatever Dora had made, and he sat in the chair, and they talked about things that were both significant and not particularly dramatic. He told her about the territory, its geography, its history, the families who had lived on this land for generations, and the ones who had arrived more recently, and how the 2 groups negotiated the difference. She asked questions that were smart and specific, and he answered them the same way, and after a while the dynamic had the quality of a conversation between 2 people who are interested in the same things and have noticed this about each other. He did not tell her what he planned to do about her mother. She did not ask. Not yet. On the evening of day 18, she asked him about the wolves. He was quiet for a moment, the way he went quiet when a question required him to decide how much to give. "They're part of this territory," he said. "They've been here longer than the families, longer than the house. They're not separate from us. They're part of what this place is." She looked at the window. "The old one," she said. "Why does he stay out there?" Calder followed her gaze. Outside, the familiar shape of the wolf was just visible in the reflected light from the room. "He goes where he decides to go," Calder said. "I've never successfully redirected him." Clara was quiet. He was the one who found me, she said. Yes. And he just decided. That's what it looked like. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then softly, I didn't think anyone would find me. Calder said nothing. He let it sit, which was the right thing to do. I didn't want anyone to, she continued, her voice entirely even, not asking for a response, just releasing it into the air of the room, where it could exist without needing to be caught. I had gone past the point of wanting anything. I just walked until I couldn't. She looked at the fire. I'm glad the wolf had different ideas, she said. Still even, still careful. I'm glad that, now. Calder held his cup with both hands and looked at the fire beside her. Me too, he said, which was the least elaborate sentence he had said in their entire acquaintance, and it landed with all the weight that brevity earns when it's chosen over everything available. Clara's throat moved. The fire crackled once. Outside, the wolf shifted his position slightly in the snow, resettling, and then was still again. She walked out of the healer's room on the morning of day 22. The hallway outside was stone, the same pale gray as the ceiling she had studied in the first hours of consciousness, and it ran in both directions with the purposeful straightness of something that had been built to last. She stood in it for a moment, her hand still on the doorframe behind her, just feeling the difference. The air here was slightly cooler, less intimate, a public space after the particular privacy of a sick room. She was wearing clothes that were not her own. A gray sweater that fit loosely, dark trousers, boots that were slightly too large but had been stuffed at the toe with a small amount of fabric to make them manageable. Dora had produced these things without explanation, and Clara had put them on without asking where they came from. She walked down the hallway. It opened into a larger room, high-ceilinged, with windows on two walls that showed the pine ridge in the gray morning light, the snow-covered peaks of the pines with the pale sky above them, and Clara stopped in the middle of the room and looked at it for a long time. It was beautiful. She allowed herself that observation without commentary. Owen found her there 3 minutes later. He stopped at the entrance to the room and took her in with the professional, non-intrusive attention of a man who was good at reading situations without inserting himself into them. "You're up," he said. "Yes." He tilted his head toward the far door. "Kitchen's that way." Dora left instructions about breakfast. Clara considered him. "You're Owen." He looked mildly surprised, then recovered. "Calder mentioned me?" "He mentioned someone named Owen, who is professional and doesn't editorialize, and has worked with him for 9 years. Owen absorbed this. A very small, very controlled smile crossed his face and disappeared. "That's an accurate description," he said. "I'll take it." She followed him to the kitchen. It was large, warm, with the comfortable clutter of a space that was actually used rather than maintained for appearance, and it smelled of wood smoke and coffee and something with cardamom. Dora's instructions were written on a card on the counter in small, precise handwriting and detailed exactly what Clara should eat, in what order, and at what temperature. Clara followed the instructions. Owen made coffee and stood at the counter and did not talk unnecessarily, which she appreciated. They were on the second cup when she heard boots in the hallway, and then Calder was in the kitchen doorway, his coat on, hair not yet fully ordered, looking like a man who had come straight from somewhere outside. He looked at her standing at the counter with a coffee cup in both hands. Something moved in his face and then settled. "You're up," he said. "Everyone keeps saying that," she said. He came into the kitchen and poured coffee and leaned against the counter across from her, and it was the most ordinary thing in the world. The 4 walls and the 2 cups and the morning light through the window, and Clara felt it land on her like something she was not ready for and could not refuse. Ordinary. She had not had ordinary in a very long time. She looked down at her coffee. "I want to know what you're planning," she said. "About my mother." Calder set his cup down. Owen became very interested in the window. "I sent her a letter 3 weeks ago," Calder said, "telling her you were here, that you were safe, and that you would not be returning. Clara was quiet. She didn't take that as final, she said. Not a question. She filed 2 additional reports with town authorities, Calder said. Described you as mentally unwell, requested that a welfare check be conducted. Clara's jaw moved once. Owen responded to both reports, Calder continued, with documentation. What documentation? Calder and Owen exchanged a look. It was brief and opaque. Documentation, Owen said, that provided an accurate description of the circumstances under which you arrived on this territory, and some additional historical documentation that suggested your mother's characterization of your mental health was not supported by the facts. Clara set her cup down very carefully. She was holding herself very still in the way of someone who has learned that the response to unexpected kindness is, paradoxically, the thing most likely to undo you. You gathered evidence, she said, about what she's done. We're thorough, Owen said. It's a professional quality. Clara looked at the counter, at her hands around the cup. Will it be enough? She asked. For now, Calder said. She's a careful woman. She'll find another angle, but right now she doesn't have one. Clara nodded. Processing. She'll come here eventually, Clara said. She doesn't accept no. I know, Calder said. I've read the file. And she's welcome to come to the border. He said this with the specific, unhurried calm of a man who had thought through every version of the conversation and settled on the one that required the least energy because it had the clearest outcome. Clara looked at him. You're not worried about her, she said. I'm worried about many things, Calder said. Eleanor Vane is not one of them. Clara looked at him for a long moment. At the unlaced boot. She noticed it every time. Today it was the left one. She looked back at her coffee. She's going to say things about me, Clara said, quietly, flatly, to whoever will listen. She's good at it. She's been doing it for a long time. Yes, Calder said. She probably will. And you'll hear it. Your people will hear it. Yes. And you're still, Clara. His voice was even, not cutting her off. Just placing her name in the air between them like something solid. I read the file before I knew you. What I know now is considerably more than what's in the file. There is no version of what she could say that would change the weight of what I already know. She looked at the window. The pines outside were very still in the windless morning. She pressed her lips together briefly. Then, all right. He picked up his coffee. She picked up hers. Owen continued to find the window very interesting. The kitchen was warm and ordinary, and the cardamom smell was coming from the pot Dora had left on the low heat on the stove, and Clara Vane stood in the middle of all of it, with both hands around her cup, and let herself, carefully, provisionally, with a precision she had developed over many difficult years, be exactly where she was. It was not safety yet, not the full, unconditional kind, but it was something real and warm that she was standing in, and she was standing in it of her own choosing, and that was new. That was genuinely, specifically, practically new. The old wolf came into the kitchen that afternoon. No one let him in. He simply appeared in the doorway, walked to the rug in front of the hearth, turned twice, and lay down. Clara was sitting at the kitchen table alone, going through one of Dora's books on local plant species, when this happened. She looked at the wolf. He looked at her. She went back to her book. He put his chin on his paws. She had no name for him. She had been using him in her mind. The old wolf, the one from the forest, the one who sat outside her window, the one who stayed. After a while she said, quietly to the room, I'm going to call you Finn. The wolf's ear twitched. She took that as agreement. By the end of the 4th week, she was helping Dora full-time in the preparation room, which was a smaller space off the healer's wing where the tinctures and remedies were made. She was methodical and clean, and she asked the right questions, the kind that came from actually wanting to understand, rather than wanting to be seen as someone who asks questions. Dora taught her without being asked. Some evenings, Calder was too busy to come to the kitchen. Those evenings, Owen appeared instead, and they talked about the territory with the straightforward exchange of two people who are both, at heart, practical. He told her how the governance worked, the agreements between families, the way disputes were handled, the specific responsibilities of the Alpha King's position. She asked good questions. He answered them. "You're trying to understand the whole structure," Owen said on the third evening of this. "I like to know what I'm inside of," she said. He nodded. He understood that completely. On the fifth week, she started going outside. Short walks at first, the inner courtyard only, the stone walls on four sides with the sky above. She went in the afternoons, when the light was best, and she walked the perimeter once, twice, and then she stood in the middle of the courtyard and turned her face up to the cold, clear sky and closed her eyes. Finn was always with her. She had stopped questioning why. It was simply true, the way some things are true, and the most useful response was to stop wondering about it and fold it into what she knew. Calder saw her the first time from his window in the North Tower. He did not come down. He stood at the glass and watched her in the courtyard with the wolf and the winter light, and he let himself have the 3 seconds it took to acknowledge what he was looking at, and then he went back to his desk. 3 seconds was what he allowed himself. He was generally good at limits. He gave himself 6 on the second day, which told him something he was not yet prepared to do anything about. The morning Eleanor Vane arrived at the southern boundary marker was a Tuesday in early December, cold and very clear, the sky the hard blue of good china. She came alone, which was either confidence or strategy, and it took Calder about 4 seconds to determine it was both. She was a tall woman, dressed well, carrying herself with the particular upright precision of someone who has never once been late and expects everyone around them to understand what that means about their character. She was not what people imagined when Clara spoke of her, which she rarely did, and the rarity itself said more than any description. She stood at the boundary marker. She waited. Owen drove out to meet her first, which was procedure. He offered her the kind of formal, entirely correct greeting that is functionally identical to being told, "Nothing will be simple about this interaction." She asked to speak with whoever was in charge. Owen said he would convey the request. She looked past him toward the main house with the expression of someone storing coordinates. Calder came out himself, which he did not have to do and which he chose to do for reasons that were both strategic and personal, and he walked out to the boundary line with his hands in his coat pockets and stopped 5 feet from Eleanor Vane and looked at her. She had blue eyes, the exact color of Clara's. He had not been prepared for that. He absorbed it in the space of a breath and moved on. "Mr. Hale," she said. She had looked him up. Of course she had. "Mrs. Vane," he said. "I believe you have my daughter." "Clara is here," he said. "She's well. She asked to stay." "Clara is unwell," Eleanor Vane said, with the precision of someone saying a thing they have said many times and have learned to say smoothly. "She is not in a position to make decisions that serve her own best interests. This has been true for some time. It's a painful thing to manage as a parent." Calder looked at her steadily. "I've read everything you've filed," he said. "I've also read everything that could be filed about the last 8 years of Clara's life, and the 10 before that." Eleanor Vane did not blink. "That sounds like a threat," she said. "It sounds like information," he said. "You're welcome to interpret it however it's most useful to you." A pause. The wind at the boundary, the pines at their backs, the cold blue sky above. "I want to see my daughter," Eleanor Vane said. Calder said nothing for a moment. "Clara decides that," he said. Eleanor Vane's eyes moved. "A small, fast calculation. You'll ask her. I'll tell her you're here." He turned back toward the house, and Owen fell into step beside him, and Eleanor Vane was left at the boundary marker with the expression of a woman who was revising a plan and doing it quickly. Calder did not hurry. He walked back to the house at the same pace he had left it, hands still in his coat pockets, and he went directly to the kitchen, where he knew Clara would be at this hour, because she was consistent in ways that were not rigid, but simply reliable. She was at the table with Finn's head on her feet. She looked at him when he came in. She read his face in the way she had gotten better at over 5 weeks of paying careful attention to him, and she said, without preamble, "She's here." "At the boundary line," he said. Clara looked at her hands on the table. "She wants to see me," Clara said. "She said so." "And you told her?" "That you decide." She was quiet for a long time. Finn's tail moved once, slow, against the kitchen floor. "I don't want to see her," Clara said. "Not yet. Not like this, with her standing at a line as if she's owed something." "Then you won't." She looked at him. "You'll tell her that?" "Yes." She looked back at her hands. "Will she accept it?" she asked. "No," he said honestly, "but it won't matter." She turned her face toward the window, and she looked at the pines in the cold blue morning for a moment, and something shifted in her face that he had seen once before. In the kitchen, over the cups, that first morning she had been upright. A person taking account of something unexpected, revising an inventory they have kept for a long time. She stood up. "I'll tell her myself," she said. He looked at her. "I need to," she said simply. "Not because she deserves to hear it from me, but because I need to be the one who says it." He understood that entirely. Owen drove her to the boundary line in the pack's truck, with Calder in the passenger seat and Finn in the back, which was not standard protocol, but Finn did not observe standard protocol. Clara Vane was still at the marker. Clara got out of the truck. They stood 15 feet apart in the cold blue morning, the two of them, and the wind was still, and the pines were still, and the whole landscape held its breath, the way landscapes do when something long delayed is finally arriving. Clara Vane began to speak. She had a whole architecture ready. Clara could see it from 15 feet away. The prepared expression, the modulated voice, the version of the story that put Eleanor at the center of a tragedy she had done everything to prevent. Clara waited. When Eleanor paused for breath, Clara spoke. 8 words. She said them in a voice that was not raised and was not broken. A voice that had been taken apart and rebuilt from components that were entirely her own, without borrowed fear, without permission, without the particular exhaustion of a person who has been fighting the same battle for so long they have forgotten what quiet feels like. 8 words. Calder heard them from 10 feet away. He would not repeat them later, not because they were secret, but because they belonged to Clara, the way some things belong entirely to the person who earned them, and they did not need to be carried by anyone else. Clara Vane's face did something it had not done in a very long time. It became uncertain. Clara turned away before her mother had composed a response. She walked back to the truck. She got in. She looked straight ahead through the windshield at the pine ridge with its high, still trees and its cold, beautiful sky. Calder got in without speaking. Owen drove. Finn put his head over the seat back and rested it on Clara's shoulder, which he had never done before, and she put her hand on the side of his face and held it there, and she did not look out the back window. Whatever was behind her could have the view. She was done giving it her face. The days after that were ordinary, in the best possible sense of the word. She helped Dora. She walked the courtyard with Finn. She learned the names of the families in the territory and the shapes of their histories, and she told Owen, one afternoon in the kitchen over the 3rd cup, that she had been a records administrator for the 3 years before everything came apart, and she was good at it, and if there was anything along those lines that needed doing, she would be glad to do it. Owen stared at her. "We have a filing situation," he said, carefully, in the voice of a man who has been dreading a conversation for a long time and cannot believe it is resolving this easily. "In the East Office, it has been a situation for approximately 2 years. "I'll start tomorrow," she said. Owen pressed his lips together. "I'm going to tell Calder you said that." "Please do." She started the next morning. The East Office was, in fact, a considerable situation. She did not blink. She started at one end and worked toward the other, and she was thorough and she was steady, And by the end of the first week, the shape of a system was emerging from the disorder, visible like the pine ridge emerging from cloud on a clearing day. Calder stood in the doorway on the 6th day and looked at what had been done. Owen wasn't exaggerating about the situation, Clara said, not looking up from the folder she was sorting. No, Calder said. He came in and sat on the edge of the desk she was not currently using, which was technically not a chair, but he did it anyway, and he watched her work for a moment. "Are you all right?" he asked. She looked up at him. She had learned, over these weeks, the difference between the version of that question that was social convention and the version that was Calder, which always meant the actual thing. "Better than I was," she said. "Not as good as I'll be." He nodded. "That's an honest answer." "I try." She went back to the folder. "Clara," he said. She looked up again. He was looking at her with the directness she had come to expect from him. No preparation, no softening, just the thing he wanted to say landing exactly where it was aimed. "You're not going anywhere," he said. "I want to make sure you know that isn't conditional." She held his gaze for a moment. "I know," she said. Then, after a pause, "I'm starting to believe it." He nodded once. He got off the desk and went back to his work, and she went back to hers, and the East office was quiet, except for the sound of papers being put in order, which is not a dramatic sound, but it is the sound of something being set right. It is not a small sound, if you know what it means. By the time December turned, she had found her rhythm in the territory, the way water finds its level, gradually, without announcement. She knew the names of the wolves in the outer pack, the ones who ran the northern boundary. She knew which families had disputes that were old and which ones were new. She knew that Owen took his coffee without anything in it, and that Calder took his with 2 spoons of something that he would not admit to, and that Dora kept her book face down when she wanted to be interrupted and upright when she did not. She knew the sound of Calder's boots in the hallway, which was still occasionally unlaced, and she knew which pace meant he was in a hurry and which meant he was coming to the kitchen. She knew the weight of Finn's head on her feet, which was considerable. She knew what the pines looked like at 6 in the morning from the courtyard, and at noon, and in the blue hour before the lights came on in the main house, which was her favorite. She was learning what it felt like to know things again. She had forgotten that the world could be something you learned instead of something that happened to you. On a Thursday evening in mid-December, she was in the kitchen when Calder came in, and she handed him a cup without turning around, the way she had done in the East office and a dozen times since, because she always heard him coming. He took it. She turned and looked at him. He looked at her. "She filed another report," he said. "The 3rd office this time. And Owen is handling it. Same documentation. There are more offices she can file with. We'll handle those too." Clara nodded. "She's not going to stop." "No," he said. "Probably not." She looked at the cup in her hands. "Does that bother you?" "Does it bother you?" he asked. She thought about it honestly. "Less than it used to," she said. "She's further away than she's ever been. Even when she's at the boundary, she's further away." Calder was quiet. "She lost the thing that gave her power," Clara said. "Which was my belief that I had nowhere else to go." She looked up at him. "I know where I am now," she said. "That changes everything." He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said quietly, "Yes, it does." Clara nodded. She looked at the window. Outside, in the courtyard, Finn was doing his evening circuit, unhurried, systematic, the same route he walked every night at this hour. She watched him through the glass, the familiar gray shape in the cold dark. "He found me first," she said. "Did you know he's never done that before? Stayed at the boundary for a downed person. He's just never done it." "I know," Calder said. "Why do you think he did?" A pause. "I think," Calder said carefully, "that he recognized something worth staying for." Clara looked at the courtyard. Finn completed his circuit and sat down exactly where he always sat, upright, ears forward, facing the kitchen window. She pressed her palm against the cold glass. He looked at her hand, and then up at her face. She stayed like that for a moment, her warmth against the cold, the wolf on the other side, the night air between them, the pine ridge beyond, the stars beginning above the trees in the hard December sky, the kind of stars that are only possible when the air is very clean. She had lain down in the snow expecting nothing, and here she was, standing at a warm window with a cup in her hand, knowing the names of the wolves, knowing the coffee orders, knowing the boot sounds in the hallway, knowing where she was. She had not planned for this. She had not planned for any of this. And that, it turned out, was the point. The things that save you are almost never the things you planned for. They are the wolf who sits down. They are the healer who asks no questions. They are the man with the serious name and the unlaced boot who asks what you want and then simply provides it when you find the words. She took her palm from the glass. The fog of her warmth lingered on the cold surface for a moment, and then faded. She turned back to the room. Calder was watching her. She looked at him, and something that had been held tightly in the center of her chest for a very long time, not released, not healed, not resolved, but simply no longer carried alone, shifted, very slightly, in a direction that felt like the beginning of something she did not yet have a name for, but was no longer afraid to find out. "Thank you," she said. He shook his head very slightly. "You stayed," he said. "That was yours." She looked at him. She thought about the first morning, the ceiling, the stars outside the window she had not expected, the word ordinary arriving in the kitchen like something returning from a long absence. She thought about the snow. "I stayed," she agreed. And that, for now, was the whole story. The rest of it was still being written. In the courtyard, Finn put his chin on his paws. Above the pines, the stars were doing what stars do in a cold, clean sky. They were being exactly where they were. That was enough. That had always been enough. She just had not been in a place where she could see it. She was now.